incredible successes of our military, achieved in a matter of weeks. President Trump, unlike other presidents, has had the courage to ensure Iran never gets a nuclear weapon, and he's ironclad in that. We have the best negotiator in the world driving that deal. The biggest challenge, the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans.
How sad. How sad, first of all, that a child is allowed to hold that position, an immature child that doesn't even understand. There's so many things he doesn't understand. But the first thing he doesn't understand is that the people that are on that committee are members of the Armed Services Committee. And as a former member of the Armed Services Committee, I can tell you most of those people have military bases in their district. Most of those people represent the men and women in uniform that fight for this country, that are deployed across the world, that are deployed across the Middle East. And their first concern is the safety and the security of those soldiers and sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guard members. That's their concern. And this guy acts like a punk, a little punk, saying that those members of the Armed Services Committee, who mind you, are actually fulfilling the oath before country and God that they gave and following the orders, not of one president, but of our founding fathers in the Constitution in Article 1, to have oversight over an administration, any administration, just like we did with the Clinton administration, just like we did with the Bush administration, just like Republicans did with the Obama administration. That is what they take an oath to do. And Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, just said that these Article 1 representatives were a greater adversary to America than Iran's Revolutionary Guard, than Iran's mullahs, a greater adversary than all of those groups, the terrorist proxy groups that are trying to kill our soldiers every day. Isn't it pretty remarkable? Pretty remarkable that we've been lectured by MAGA world over the past week that you can't say anything. You can't say, oh, the president's acting like an authoritarian because you may get him killed. Oh, the president is actually, he's acting like a fascist, or he's using fascist rhetoric. So you can't say that. You can't say that because you might cause people to shoot him, as if the two go together. And here you have Pete Hegseth saying that members of Congress doing their constitutional job are greater threats than the Revolutionary Guard. And listen, just for the record, as Jonathan Chait pointed out in The Atlantic a couple of days ago, Donald Trump regularly calls his opponents that he disagrees with communists, traitors, people who need to be shot in the face. So it's just such nonsense. It really is. And I understand hacks doing it. I understand hacks. But when the Wall Street Journal editorial page and the National Review goes down that tired line, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So here we have, Willie, a Secretary of Defense that says the greatest adversary to U.S. troops right now, not the Revolutionary Guard, but members of Congress who want to know, I don't know, basic things. How much money have we spent there? We finally got the answer yesterday. What actually are the reasons why we went to war? Because he really still didn't give us a clearly defined answer. He did say, and I'm glad he said it, there can never be a nuclear Iran. So if he decides, and this administration decides to cut and run, while Iran still has nuclear weapons, then, well, I guess by his own definition, there's a failure. But another thing happened yesterday, and I swear to God, it's just, I don't know if they're children or they thinking that everybody that follows them are children. But we heard once again yesterday them kind of juggling the ball, saying, We destroyed Iran's nuclear capability. Oh, okay, great. We have to go to war because Iran's 2 weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. Wait, but you destroyed it a year ago. Now you're saying they're 2 weeks away. And we had the same sort of tap dance yesterday. We can't leave until their nuclear program's destroyed. Oh, the president destroyed their nuclear program. So this whole thing, again, it's an embarrassing exercise. And I do mean this. He's not only... It's not only embarrassing for the United States of America. I keep saying this. It's embarrassing for the Republican Party. It's embarrassing for the President of the United States, who deserves and needs somebody better running the Pentagon than this child who embarrasses Donald Trump every time he goes out and talks.
Yeah, these performances that we see from Pete Hegseth once a week or so are designed to humor the president, to please the president, to get a pat on the back from the president. But as you say, they're not helping the president in this war effort at all. And any basic question, the ones you just laid out, how much does the war cost? Did you not see the consequences of war, like the Strait of Hormuz potentially being closed, which every former military leader we've had on this show said that's one of the first questions you ask. When the subject of Iran comes up, the next question is, what about the Strait of Hormuz? The cost of gas is now $4.23. All of these consequences, all of these outcomes, did you not consider them? And the response to that from Secretary Hegseth yesterday is, why do you hate America? Why are you rooting against the war? You're the actual bad guys. If you deign to criticize or ask questions about this war, you're rooting against America. That's just not how it works here in America, Jonathan Lemire. But President Trump seems to like Secretary Hegseth, likes his combativeness, likes the way he performs. He's sort of adopted the language of Donald Trump. And so there he sits at the head of the Pentagon as this war drags on, frankly, with no end in sight.
Secretary Hegseth, frankly, doesn't have that many allies or friends within the White House, but he has the only one that matters. President Trump likes him, loves the performative outrage that we see in those briefings at the Pentagon and likely yesterday. It's worth highlighting this. We just showed what Hegseth said, that the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats. A few moments later, when General Kane gave his opening remarks, he included a line about General George C. Marshall's commitment to a nonpartisan military, saying, quote, "That remains a constant standard and something I borrow from often." So General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying what you should say there. The military is not supposed to be political.
Yes.
Secretary Hegseth not doing the same. And we, as Willie just said, there are real ramifications for this war. There are no negotiations planned. The Strait of Hormuz is shut. Yes, U.S. officials believe the blockade is working, but we have a long way to go. And overnight, oil prices surged, hitting a fresh wartime high, Joe and Mika.
Right.
And right now, the Trump administration is looking for a way out without an obvious answer.
Well, let's commend General Kane, first of all, for using as his North Star General George Marshall, who never voted in an election, as his father never voted in an election. He always stayed away from politics, did everything he could to do that. He was a soldier first. And so when you see this petulant display, I can say, people can say, oh, Donald Trump likes it. I don't know. He didn't like it when Pam Bondi did it. And yesterday reminded me of Pam Bondi's performance, the worst performance on Capitol Hill, I think, certainly I've ever seen before the Armed Services Committee. When you actually tell Republicans and Democrats that they are a greater adversary than the Revolutionary Guard, that they are a greater adversary than the mullahs, the ayatollahs in Iran, that they're a greater adversary than the government that has actually run a state that's the epicenter of terrorism since 1979. And here's what is lost for President Trump. Oil prices are going up. If you actually had a grown-up go in there and explain, listen, we understand oil prices are going up and we feel terrible for the American people. This is what we're calculating, though. We need to keep the blockade in place because we understand we've degraded their military targets. Our military is the best in the world. They can't do any better than they've done, and we're just so damn proud of them. But at this point, the real pressure point with the Iranians is now economic. We've done everything we can do militarily. And we've done it well, and we're so proud of that. But now our military is going to be used to choke their economy off. And that, at the end of the day, is what's going to bring them to the negotiating table. So we can have a safe Iran, we can have a safe region, we can have a safe world free from a nuclear Iran. If the right person had said that for the Trump administration, people would understand, okay, yes, oil's going to go up for the next week or two. But on the other side of it, you have the UAE proving what great allies they are, getting out of OPEC, because they say they want to be reliable partners to the United States. So there was a way to do that.
Yeah.
But because he decided to go full Bondi, and
that was full Bondi.
Yeah. Willie, I think we all know this. You never go full Bondi, right? You never go full Bondi.
No.
It never works. And he went full Bondi. Man, you don't go full Bondi.
You don't do it.
He went full Bondi.
You've just cited a new term, I think, that's going to be used throughout the briefings that we've seen from Secretary Hegseth. By the way, your point about the nuclear program and ambitions is an important one, because despite what he was saying yesterday, in June of 2025, after Operation Midnight Hammer, Secretary Hegseth said, quote, Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. It's over. That was 10 months ago. And now the defense of the war, which is,
strike up the band.
It's warranted if there's still nuclear material in the nuclear program. He says, no. We've got to stop. We might have wiped out their capabilities, but they still have the ambition. That's why we have to keep fighting in Iran.
Let's look at the big picture. With us, author and staff writer for The Atlantic, Ann Applebaum, and decorated combat veteran and former commander of U.S. Army Europe, retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Herdling, who we are happy to say is joining MS Now as a military analyst.
And that is a reason to strike up the band. We're gonna get on to Ukraine in a minute, General, because so much is going on right now. We're literally seeing history move before our eyes. It's extraordinary what the Ukrainians are doing every day. But I want to first have you comment on what we saw yesterday. It's too easy, quite frankly, to continue criticizing this child's performance. What I'd like you to tell our viewers is what should a mature SecDef in the middle of a war said to Congress yesterday? What would you have liked to hear?
Yeah, Joe, it's a great question, because first of all, we have to review what this hearing was supposed to be all about. The center point of this hearing was to defend a $1.45 trillion request for a bump up in the Defense Department budget. I didn't hear a whole lot of discussion about the budget at all. That's a 40% increase in what they were initially given by the NDAA. So that kind of fell by the wayside. And the second thing I'd say, having testified before members of Congress myself, the disrespect that was shown by the Secretary of Defense to the organization that has First Amendment powers of basically questioning different department heads about what they're doing in an oversight role was just, to me, beyond the pale. There was smirks, there was bad body language, there was arguments, there was over-talking. And again, having myself testified before Congress, that's just not a way to win the approval of the budget that you're trying to submit. There's 50%, almost 50% of the Congress now that just sees the secretary as someone who is going to bluster, who's going to talk about things, who's going to overtalk and not answer questions. So in and of itself, even some of the answers he was giving in terms of the cost of the war, trying to answer good questions about potential war crimes that were committed, responsibility and accountability of him and the force. There is no one questioning the actions of the U.S. military. They have been magnificent in what they have been asked to do. I have not seen a single person say that, the military actions have been bad. What the question is what's the end state? What comes after the military? What hits the next sets of decisive points in Iran, according to the theorist Jomini? And how do you get to the center of gravity to get them at the negotiating table? That's all by the wayside right now. And it's just confusing to me how he can, to use your term, go full Bondi and expect any kind of coordination with the members of Congress who give him the money that he needs for the Defense Department.
He went full Bondi. You never go full Bondi. Let me say this in a way that the president may understand, and I'm dead serious. Not only is it disrespectful, I know the president has no problem with that, but I've sat through hundreds of these hearings on the Armed Services Committee. It's ineffective. It's ineffective.
It seemed desperate,
it's ineffective to everybody. Republicans and Democrats that may be split on other issues will come together afterwards, and they'll stick it to him every chance they get moving forward. It's ineffective. It's like using a 60 wedge, when you're driving on a par 5 or taking out a driver when you're 20 yards from the green. Nobody does it. There's a reason they don't do it. It's ineffective. So Pete Hegseth went full Bondi, and it's only going to hurt him with the committee. It's only going to hurt him with the Congress. It's only going to hurt him with this war effort.
So we also learned yesterday that President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke on the phone for more than an hour. A top advisor to Putin said the Russian president expressed his readiness for a short ceasefire coinciding with Russia's Victory Day celebrations on May 9th that marked the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. President Trump was asked about their conversation yesterday in the Oval Office.
But I had a long talk with President Putin. I suggested a little bit of a ceasefire, and I think he might do that. He might announce something having to do with that. Did he announce it yet?
No, but I was wondering, I was just going to ask you.
No, I asked him about, even if it's a little ceasefire, there's so many people being killed, it's so ridiculous.
Do you think the war in Iran ends first or the war in Ukraine?
Well, we talked more about the war in Ukraine, but he would like to be of help. I said, before you help me, I want to end your war. So we had a good talk. I've known him a long time. I think he was ready to make a deal a while ago. I think some people made it difficult for him to make a deal, but we talked more about Ukraine.
But which war do you think ends first?
That's an interesting question. Coming from you, that's very interesting. Which war would end first? I don't know. Maybe they're on a similar timetable. I think Ukraine, militarily, they're defeated. Okay, you wouldn't know that by reading the fake news.
Okay, so based on what the president went on to say right after that line, he likely meant to say Iran is defeated militarily, not Ukraine.
Well, I will say,
first.
though, perhaps maybe the reason he said it is because Ann Applebaum, that's what they've been saying for a year. It's been a lie for a year. We've talked on this show about how they constantly lie inside the White House. Everybody that I've talked to about how Ukraine's about to lose. Ukraine's about to lose the Donbass. Ukraine has to just take a horrible deal. Ukraine needs to crawl to the table and give the Russians whatever they want. That's just not the case. And can you help Americans understand just what's happening over there over the last 2-3 weeks and the growing sense of confidence on the side of the Ukrainians?
So it's really interesting whenever President Putin thinks he might be losing the war or whenever he needs an extra boost, he calls President Trump because he's hoping that by manipulating the American president, he can somehow put pressure on the Ukrainians or on the Europeans because he's actually in a very, very bad position right now. As you have been reporting over many weeks, Ukraine has really transformed the battlefield. I mean, it's been true for the last couple of years, but it's become especially clear in the last few weeks and months. The Russians are not able to move forward. The Ukrainians are now able to kill more Russian troops every month than the Russians are able to recruit. So the Russians now have a problem continuing to man the battlefield and even to keep the war going. And the other new element, or newish, because it's also been true for a while, is that the Ukrainians are using their ever better developed long-range drone capability to really hit Russian refineries and other infrastructure way behind the front line. And we actually saw that in the last few days. They hit a refinery in a place called Tuapse, and it produced these spectacular black smoke, billowing smoke that covered the town. And they did it repeatedly over several days. So probably putting a refinery that's critical for providing fuel to Russian troops in the battlefield, probably putting that out of business. And so the Russians know they're not winning, and they're still hoping that through Trump and through their ability to control him psychologically, or whatever it is that they think they have, they're still hoping to win through some kind of pressure. But the Ukrainians have had very, very little U.S. help in the last year. I'm sure you'll want to go on and talk about that. Most of their funding now comes from Europe, 95% of it. And in the last few weeks, they've begun doing deals with the Middle East. You saw probably Zelensky in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in the Emirates, selling Ukrainian drone capabilities to the Gulf. And I think that suddenly makes Zelensky look very different. It's not a pitiful country that it's about to lose. It's actually a country that has some of the most advanced military technology in the world. And lots of people want it, even if the United States is not enthusiastic. And I think the Ukrainians are not worried right now about running out of money or running out of weapons.
And in fact, in the midst of their own war, offering the United States our technology to fight the war in Iran. So, Ann, it's been said many times by experts that for the former KGB officer Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump has been his easiest mark over the years because he knows how to manipulate him, as you just said, with flattery and these phone calls. But how important is that relationship to the future of this war? In other words, if Putin keeps Donald Trump under his thumb, as he has, does that allow him to survive the war that appears he's losing at the moment?
Well, yeah. Putin hopes that it will keep Trump in the game, in other words, because Trump is actually at risk of becoming irrelevant to the war. If the United States aren't giving the Ukrainians much help, if their intelligence is less and less important, as I gather it is, then Ukraine can fight the war, whatever happens to the United States, because they now have a new $90 billion loan from the European Union, which is, by the way, according to the latest calculations, it's more money than the United States has given Ukraine, during the entire war. That's a loan that's backed up by the Russian frozen assets, and so it's a loan that hopefully will never be paid back. But the loan has been now agreed to by the European Council now that the Hungarian election removed the last obstacle. They're developing these trade and financial relationships with the Middle East. And so the question is the U.S. still needed in the war? Is it still an influential player? I mean, of course, the Ukrainians don't want to alienate the U.S., but it's Putin who wants to keep Trump in the war.
Right. And Ann, a little more on that Trump-Putin relationship. First of all, the White House did not advise this call. You used to be with administrations, even Trump 1.0. If there's a foreign leader call, they'd put out a read-up, they'd let the reporters know. The State Department might say something. None of that. We only know about it because Trump blurted it out in the Oval Office yesterday. We also should note that yesterday, President Trump took to Truth Social to respond, it would seem, to what German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said, that Iran has humiliated the United States. So he's obviously angry at Germany. And on Truth Social yesterday says the United States is studying and reviewing the possible reduction of troops in Germany, which just so happens to be one of Vladimir Putin's goals, is to reduce the American military footprint in Europe, as there's growing speculation that even though Ukraine, the war has not gone at all the way Putin thinks, that he's eyeing some of these smaller NATO countries, whether it's Estonia or Latvia, whatever it may be, and believing that at least the United States wouldn't come to their aid.
So European countries are now, first of all, acting on the assumption or preparing for some kind of desperate Russian move as it becomes clear that they can't win in the war in Ukraine, maybe another invasion, maybe some kind of attack on a NATO state. And while they're having that conversation, they're also asking, and they're doing it in public now. So it was behind closed doors for a long time, and now it's in public. They're now asking, would the United States come? And if it's not going to, are we prepared? And so one of the reasons you're hearing this kind of language from Europe is because that's now the ongoing conversation, is what will we do and how will we react? And there are preparations being made along those lines. I mean, again, nobody wants to break the U.S. relationship. And if you go kind of one level down, if you get generals talking to other generals, their relations are as good as they always were. And actually, the U.S. is using German bases in Iran all the time, every day. And there are military exercises between the U.S. and NATO and U.S. and other allies happening all the time. And so the breakage and the bad blood in the relationship is really only coming from Trump and from the cabinet, from the very highest levels. Lower down, everything is as it was.
And I know you've been covering the royal visit here to the U.S. as well. It was noteworthy to a lot of people, I'm curious if it was to you, that King Charles made a point in his address to Congress of highlighting the Ukraine cause and the need to continue supporting them in the pursuit of freedom and pushing back against authoritarianism. What did you make of that direct call inside that chamber?
Oh, I'm sure it was. I mean, I'm sure it came directly from the UK government, and it was meant to be heard. It was also really important that it happened in the context of Charles mentioning 9/11 and mentioning the NATO reaction after 9/11, which is something Trump has downplayed or maybe doesn't know very much about. Because for the British, this was very important. They fought in Iraq, they fought in Afghanistan. They considered that they'd always contributed to U.S. military and security projects all over the world. We have very integrated intelligence services between the U.S. and the U.K. They're almost the same service. So I think it was Charles reminding Trump of this long relationship and also reminding him that Ukraine is a really important security issue for Britain. It's not just a random thing happening somewhere in Eastern Europe, but the Europeans understand victory in Ukraine as a way of securing everybody's security, and therefore including the U.S., which is so involved in the European economy and European defense.
And General, how fascinating. You just had, within the year, the J.D. Vance being petulant, humiliating himself in front of the world by yelling at Zelensky, who's leading freedom fighters against Russian invaders. You had the president bellowing that Zelensky and Ukraine had no cards. Now going across the Middle East to the Saudis, to the Emiratis, to the Qataris, to everybody else, even being kind enough to offer to us this technology that is pushing Russia back by the day. It is frighteningly effective military technology. As General Petraeus said this past week, if you want to see the future of warfare, go to Ukraine. You'll see it there. But by doing this, we've made ourselves less relevant and less needed in Ukraine. We're making ourselves less relevant and less needed in Europe. Certainly, with the president's pronouncement yesterday, going to make ourselves less relevant and less needed to Germany, who sits at the center of Europe and is an industrial power that will continue to grow in the future. Talk about how, again, when you were in the position you were in, how important those alliances are. And the last thing you would want is for our allies to think, we don't need the United States. We can go it alone.
It was my number 2 mission, Joe, and I'll reinforce what Ann just said. My number 1 mission as the commander of U.S. Army in Europe, where we had at the time, it was downsizing from 90,000 to 33,000 during my time on the continent. And I'm not sure, by the way, I should add this, I don't know how it can downsize a whole lot more and maintain our capabilities as a global footprint, because Europe does so much more than just have forces on bases. It's literally the lily pad for various theaters. But when I was in command, we would, number 1, train our soldiers and care for our families so that they might be able to deploy. And they always did throughout my time in Europe. The second major mission I had was something called theater security cooperation, which meant I was dealing with the 49 different countries within the footprint of Europe on a daily basis in terms of partnering with them and strengthening the alliances. As Ann just said, we would conduct, my last year there, we conducted over 400 different training exercises with various partners, not just in NATO, but those that were not connected to NATO. And it was a constant stream of sharing ideas, training together, but most importantly, building trust between allies. And trust is not something you can deploy. As soon as you lose trust, you're up the creek. And that's what we have done to a degree, not necessarily with our military, as Ann said, but with our government. The Europeans do not trust the administration. They still partly trust the military members they're conducting the exercises with. But truthfully, when you're talking about sharing of intelligence and sharing of capabilities, because we haven't been doing that lately, we lose trust. All of those things are important in any kind of alliance. And that's what I fear. And it pains me on a daily basis to see different things happening, like the president's comment yesterday that he was going to withdraw all the troops from Europe. We literally have billions of dollars of infrastructure and great relationships in terms of training and connections, not just with the military, but the governments over there because of our military presence there. We are fighting above our weight class, if you will. That's a term I always used to say, with 30,000 plus soldiers, an additional Air Force and Navy and Marine that come in and out of the theater. But truthfully, if we lose that alliance, it is going to harm us significantly more, exponentially more than it will hurt any of the Europeans. And they are already starting to see that.
Makes no sense. MS NOW military analyst, retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Herdling, and the Atlantic's Ann Applebaum. Thank you both very much for your insights this morning. And still ahead on Morning Joe, we'll get to the Supreme Court's historic voting rights decision.